Okay.
We're good.
All right. I am going to bring this meeting to order. This is the Growth and Natural Resources Committee. We have 2 items on our agenda today. The first is an external text change request for the Mordecai Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, and then we are going to hear about the city's Greenway Master Plan.
Yeah, we have Keegan McDonald here from our Planning and Development Department. Again, this was an externally submitted text change, was referred to committee, and ultimately we'll go through some of the detail of what the applicant submitted, and ultimately the committee can decide whether or not you wish to make a recommendation, hold it in committee, and whether or not to report it out.
All right, great. Thanks. Keegan McDonald, I'm with Planning and Development. As stated, this is related to an external text change request for the Mordecai Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. So a little bit of background first. The initial text change application was filed on April 4th of this year, again, to modify the Conservation Overlay District, specifically the regulations contained therein. There was originally a conversation scheduled for May 16th of this year. However, the council at the time decided to defer that conversation to allow for additional discussions with the applicant, also allow the applicant some opportunity to speak with residents of the neighborhood. The item ultimately came back in September, and at that time, the full council referred it to this committee for further study and discussion. So NCODs are a type of zoning overlay district, which means they sit atop the base zoning standards, and they typically prescribe more restrictive but sometimes more permissive development regulations than what the underlying zoning would otherwise permit. And for the most part, they apply to residential areas of the city, but occasionally you see them in some mixed-use areas as well. General intent is to preserve or enhance the quality and appearance of these areas of the city. The Mordecai NCOD was established in 1994. There's a little over 604 parcels split across 2 districts. So we refer to it as one NCOD, but it is split geographically into Mordecai 1, Mordecai 2. And the real difference there's one regulatory difference, which I'll get into in the following slides. Actually, just wanted to note that the NCOD boundary doesn't necessarily line up with what some folks might consider the general Mordecai neighborhood. Just in speaking with the applicant and other residents, some people consider themselves part of the Mordecai neighborhood, but they may reside outside of the actual NCOD boundary. What we're discussing today would only apply to those properties within the actual overlay district itself. So just wanted to make that distinction. The existing NCOD regulations pertain to minimum maximum lot size, minimum and maximum lot width, minimum front yard setback, and maximum building height. And what I want to note is these are the standards for District 1. If you flip to the next slide, we'll see the standards for District 2, and they are largely the same as you can see, except for the item highlighted in green, which relates to the front yard setback. So that's how far a building needs to be from the street. In the Mordecai 1 neighborhood, it's a minimum of 35 feet. In the Mordecai 2 district, it's a minimum of 15 feet and a maximum of 25 feet. So it sort of prescribes a range versus that District 1 prescribes a larger minimum. And these were arrived at based on sort of the context of each of those particular districts. So that's kind of why you see a difference there when the NCOD presumably was originally adopted. The proposed regulations can really be split out into 2 buckets, and so I'll cover the first here, which is minimum building separation. So the applicant is proposing a minimum building separation of 10 feet, and paired with that, instituting language to ensure a minimum setback of 5 feet. And the intention there is to make sure that this building separation is shared amongst neighbors. So if there is a property line dividing you, everyone needs to be about 5 feet off, or 5 feet minimum off the property line, which if you have 5 feet on either side of the property line would get you to that 10 feet mark. We're including specific language about building separation in case structures are located on the same lot, which there are options to do within this neighborhood, whether it be an apartment building or a cottage court development that I'll show an example of later. So it's kind of addressing the same issue, just from 2 different regulatory approaches, just to ensure kind of equity for those involved. And the principal building separation as proposed would apply to certain building features. So those are bay windows, which you see in the top left, covered stoops in the bottom left, vestibules shown in the bottom center, and then covered porches. So that means those features would also need to respect that sort of 10-foot separation requirement. Other features, though, would not. Wanted to provide an example of how this may play out on a particular site. This is to scale, but we're making some assumptions here. So it's really just to kind of show an illustration of how that minimum building separation might affect a project. Here you can see multiple structures located on one lot where the code may prescribe them to be a minimum of 6 feet apart. This could occur again with a cottage court pattern. If the changes were instituted, buildings would have to be further apart. That may result in 1 or 2 buildings as proposed needing to be removed to kind of accommodate that additional space. And then you see a minimum separation of 10 feet. So again, just an illustration of how that might play out for a particular project. The other bucket or component to this request relates to covered porches and covered stoops and how far they're able to encroach into the front yard. So the code allows for certain building features to go beyond the setback limitation. So that means sort of the conditioned space of your home has to respect one setback. However, certain building features like a deck, like a porch or a stoop, the code allows those to encroach a little bit further. And that's to give kind of flexibility in design and also understanding that those perhaps are less impactful than the conditioned space of a home. So what the applicant is requesting is for covered porches and covered stoops specifically to be limited to a 5-foot encroachment, whereas under the code today, they would be permitted up to a 9-foot encroachment. So that's a reduction of 4 feet. Here's an example just using that cottage court development showing a porch that could be constructed today, again, going beyond that setback up to 9 feet. We'll note we're using the cottage court as an example, but this would apply to any building constructed within the neighborhood. And then as proposed, the porch could be, or would therefore be reduced to 5 feet if the regulations as proposed were enacted and adopted. So what are the impacts? The larger separation requirement could affect the development of certain housing types. I will note that most most of the homes within the Mordecai neighborhood are within zoning districts that typically require a minimum 5-foot setback anyways. So where this would be most impactful is, again, buildings located on the same lot, like with a cottage court. But again, that development option at present allows them to be a minimum of 6 feet. So there is a difference there between what's permitted and what the applicant is proposing. And then the second piece being front porch depths or covered porch depths would also be further restricted. Just want to note that within the neighborhood, there are pretty large front yard setbacks, so that reduction in the allowed encroachment could be more impactful than perhaps in other places where the front yard is allowed to be a little bit less. So those are the impacts that kind of we as staff have potentially identified. In terms of where we're at in the process, of course, we provided that initial report to the full council back in May and still being discussed by this body. But if and when the council chooses to authorize the text change, it would go to the Planning Commission. Most every text change that makes its way to the Planning Commission gets discussed in the Text Change Committee. That's kind of where they have the more detailed discussions. Eventually, the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the full council, who will then hold a public hearing and choose to take final action. The notice and engagement for this item, the draft ordinance, if and when we get to that point, would be posted to the public engagement portal like we do with all text changes. That gives folks a chance to respond, and we provide a report to the Planning Commission and then to you all to kind of inform your decision making. The Planning Commission, Text Change Committee, all council meetings, of course, are public meetings, so there's an opportunity for folks to listen and potentially be involved there. And then because this is an NCOD, the code does require us to send mailed notice to all property owners prior to the city council public hearing. So that's what the code prescribes. And of course, we would make sure that's done prior to that point. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to note a couple items. I haven't received a ton of a community engagement on this particular topic, but I'm glad to hear about the mailed notices. I would assume there would be a lot more conversation perhaps during that process. I do have a question about if any changes were recommended, for example, by Planning Commission or during the process, can this, the way it's written, this text change, can it be amended through the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to note that we've done our best to kind of draft preliminary language based on our conversations with the applicant, but it's certainly fluid, just like any item would be at this stage. Moving into that process, if the applicant proposes something, the Planning Commission, et cetera, that could inform kind of the draft that makes its way to you all.
Yeah, I would just note one item of concern for me is non-conformance with the current porches. So if porches are more than 5 feet, how would they kind of be, I guess, grandfathered in? And so I think there might be some option to add perhaps a date to say when this starts. I don't know, but that's just one item that came to me. And I'm going to turn it to, Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, thank you. So there has been a lot of community engagement prior to this point. Originally, this came to us in August. And then when we were having some more conversations, the applicant pulled it. The second item, porches, was added, but the community worked together to pull together the initial request to staff for the text change. Just to let you know, the community is deeply involved in this because they're the ones that made the request. Two questions I have, and really they're probably things to write down for if I will support this moving forward. And there's some things I want to address. We mentioned primary homes. I just want to know, is there any impact to ADUs? Because I know we have ADU requirements, but from reading this, I think it was on where you were mentioning the principle on slide 6 on proposed regulations, you specifically states principal building separation. So ADUs wouldn't be a principal building, but what would that, could they be impacted?
Yeah, we had explicit conversations with the applicant about that point, and their desire was to only hold it to principal buildings, so that would exclude ADUs from this specific requirement, just understanding that sometimes there may be a necessity, for instance, for an ADU to be located closer to the home that it shares a lot with, right? Based on where the best buildable area on a lot may be. We didn't want to restrict that any further, and I think they felt, let them speak for themselves, but just based on that conversation, felt the larger concern was around principal buildings.
And would that be mainly for detached ADUs? Because you can't have an attached ADU, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So in terms of whether or not an addition that's an ADU, how that would be impacted, I will say we didn't talk about that specifically. Okay. Typically, once an ADU is part of the principal structure, there's the ADU use, but it has to abide by the principal structure setbacks. Okay. There's a potential for, in that scenario, for there to be an impact, but it's something that we can look into. And if we want to exclude that as well, we can look at drafting language.
Well, that's why I'm asking now. So we can,
totally
we can figure out this along the way. And then my other question is, we talk about porches in the 5 feet. What about wraparound porches?
In terms of?
Like, a lot of people think a porch is the part just coming out in front, but sometimes a porch will wrap around. If someone wants to add a porch that wraps around the house, now how does that impact the setback area? Because it's a porch, it's not the building.
Yeah, so this would only relate to the portion of the porch extending towards the front yard. So if you, for instance, are on a corner lot, or even if you're on an interior lot, the portions of your porch that are addressing the side lot line would not be impacted by this limitation as written. Okay. Meaning that those portions could actually encroach a little further based on how our regulations work. So unless it is sort of a blanket limitation, it would really only affect the relationship between the porch and the front yard or the street in most instances, not sort of the side yard or rear yard. Okay. If that makes sense.
It does. And those are my main questions. I think at some point in 2024, I think we should have a holistic conversation about NCODs.
Any other questions? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation. In the example you provided, you do a good job illustrating the impact of the number of units. And it looks like if my quick counting was right, it might in this example, limit it by 2 or 3 units. Is there any scenario that your team ran through where this change would whole scale prevent any sort of building type or development?
I think it's really challenging to say. Again, the main development option that this impacts today, granted it would continue in perpetuity if we were to tweak the code further, but the main development option it impacts today is that cottage court pattern, which allows for that reduced separation. Cottage courts have to be a minimum of 4 units, so you can do it on a relatively small site. We've really not seen many, so it's just kind of challenging to say. My assumption is probably it wouldn't necessarily lead to the infeasibility of a project, but again, these things work at the margin, so 1 unit could make the difference, but it's challenging to say.
Thank you.
If nothing else from council, I do believe there's someone from the public who'd like to speak. Can you just raise your hand, anyone from the public on this topic? Okay, great. Yeah, if you want to come on up.
Sure. So I am the applicant. I live in Mordecai.
And speak into the mic, please.
Sorry.
Thanks. And state your name. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Sean Ferris. I am the applicant here. Thank you for your service. I've been chair of the Mordecai CAC before. Designer of the Mordecai sign. Anyhow, what brought me to move into Mordecai was the fact that it had an NCOD. I thought it, was a wise investment. It stood out as a way to kind of control the aesthetic somewhat and the design. But as time has moved on, I've seen a lot of changes occur. And so really the NCOD or this text change is really to help reinforce just the character that we do have. So I think a lot of the text changes are, global to Raleigh. But I think what's unique about Mordecai and its history is primarily lots could be combined. So back in the day, you would buy 2 lots and build your home. We're seeing some of that change where buildings get torn down and people are putting 3 homes on said lots. So anyhow, what this text change is really trying to do is just evolve with the chimes, with the UDO. And again, like Corey had said, initially the building separation was the initial ask. I was asked to kind of look further, and so I asked more neighbors what their thoughts were, and the porch became another item of significance. And we looked at Cameron Park, their NCOD, and how porches are kind of considered part of the primary facade. And so that's where this whole language got added about porches. And so we want to add flexibility. We know that it can encroach the setback. So we kind of balance it out with the 5 feet. But I think what was unique about ours is we try to pick out elements which were covered porches or covered things. You could still have a deck or, wraparound porch, but if it's covered or air conditioned, we kind of wanted it to be included in that spec. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of history about, why this changed, but we really want to provide context. As a rule of thumb, not everything works, but Mordecai has a lot of active neighbors. Again, this isn't a lot of fervor, I would say. This is just kind of like a simple change. It hasn't really, I would say, it's not controversial like a major rezoning. So I've been working with the CAC. I've been on the CAC. So we're doing outreach. I think the letter will be the next big thing, to get to those folks who maybe aren't connected as much in the CAC. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful. Again, just looking to evolve our regulations and, grow with the times and really just provide guidance and context with what Mordecai needs. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, very. And thank you again. I did get to visit the site area with you, and I understand kind of where this is coming from. Any questions from council? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could share, it sounds like Councilmember Branch said your outreach has been fairly significant. You mentioned the CAC. If there's anything, can you share any other outreach? Has it been like while walking dogs, or have you hosted community meetings, or what does that look like?
I've put out a newsletter. We've done that, that kind of communication, just kind of speaking to neighbors. Our CACs kind of, we have mixers or whatever, so we try to attend, but I'm really answering for questions. People kind of know me as like a rezoning expert in the neighborhood in COD. I've been on both sides of rezoning matters. So yeah, but again, this is kind of not much of a change for Mordecai. We're really just reinforcing what we have. So only time will tell, right? And I just feel like I need to do my job as a guardian of this NCOD. I thought it was important to buy in this area, so I'm really just trying to keep it for the next generation. So I know we want Raleigh to grow, but I think on the other side, we need that coin of preservation because we don't want Raleigh to all look the same, So I think diversity in our neighborhoods is important. So I'm all for specific zoning for each district, if you will. But yeah, hopefully that's been helpful. But I just had a conversation with a neighbor on Sunday. He came to my front door asking me about the text change. And I was like, this is where we're at. It's not happening yet. But he was actually working on a home. He's an architect and was curious because he is going to have to apply for a variance because the land that he's working on, due to just the context, it's not suitable. So he's going to have to push the home a little bit into the setback. So, and that's something that happens, right, is in order to comply or be grandfathered in, it's just, you have to apply for that variance. So, but Mordecai's, a lot of history is there. So a lot of text changes have occurred. So it just depends. Because I know that one neighbor, his lot or his home was 1 feet from the side yard. So you have to then just make yourself compliant with the variance process.
Any other questions from council at this time?
I had one procedural question. If this is an external application, who does the mailed notices? The applicant or the city?
I can respond to that. We will be conducting the mail notice in this instance.
Got it.
And if the committee is okay, I did have one correction I just wanted to make to the question that Councilmember Branch asked earlier about wraparound porches. One of my colleagues, just in speaking with him, made me aware that the principal building separation requirement, and sorry, I'm just going to go to the full text because I think that makes it easier. The principal building separation requirement that we talked about earlier, that minimum 10 feet of separation is inclusive of porches. Okay. And so they are not allowed, they're allowed a certain amount of encroachment into the side yard, but in no instance can they be closer than 5 feet from a side property line. Okay. Typically it's 3 feet, so it's a difference of 2 feet, rather minimal, but I just wanted to make that known for you, for your benefit. Mm-hmm.
And at this time, is there a motion?
Move for approval to present this to the full council for recommendation of text change.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that's 4-0. So I believe we can move this out of committee.
Yeah, and just to restate for the benefit of the clerk, that the recommendation was to, the motion was to vote it out of council with a recommendation that the council initiate the text change. Is that right?
Right. Correct.
Got it. Okay. All right, well then I think we can move along to the Greenway Master Plan.
Yeah, so we'll have Chris Nickfar coming to the podium from the Park Recreation Greenway group in Park Recreation and Cultural Resources. So while Chris is working, I'll just give a little bit of a preview of what to expect. So we are going to open up with a broad overview of the Greenway Master Plan, and then we will update the council on some of the current efforts of staff teams to implement the Greenway Master Plan, as well as some upcoming recommendations that will be coming from the Park Greenway Advisory Board.
So good afternoon. As Tansy said, I'm Chris Nickfar with Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. I'm one of our Greenway planners, and I manage the update to the Greenway Master Plan. I have a lot of information to share with you this afternoon. I'm going to be giving you sort of a background on the Greenway Master Plan for those of you who aren't familiar with it, an overview of some of the projects that we're currently working on or have recently completed that support that plan, and then also an update on where we are with the Neighborhood and Community Connections program. So I'll start with the background and the reason that we updated the plan. The first Greenway Master Plan was adopted in 1976, and it was updated a few times after that. But the most recent time that it was updated before the work that we completed, this plan that was adopted in 2022, was 1989. So obviously the city has experienced tremendous change in that time in terms of population, in terms of geography, and in terms of interest and use of the system. We had an extensive public outreach process for the update of the plan. We had a 30-member steering committee guide the process of the plan. They met 7 times over the course of the update. We had 2 online surveys, which were completed by over 4,000 people. We had 14 focus groups, 3 virtual open houses, and direct outreach to 39 community-based organizations. The plan accomplished an awful lot. Some of the more significant things that it did was define trail classifications, and I'll sort of get more into explanation of what those are in the next slide after that. For the first time, it created a trail project prioritization process for us, so that's a way for us to determine which projects to focus on first, second, third, and so forth. It identified new trail projects. It identified projects to reinvest in some of our existing trails, expanded our open space corridors, and then on the right there, you'll see there's a list of recommendation topics. The plan includes over 100 recommendations, some of which are things that we had already been doing, as well as new recommendations, and those fall, generally speaking, underneath those topics that are listed there on the right side. So trail classifications are a way that we can designate a type of trail based on the locations that the trail connects, the type of users that we anticipate using it, and the potential amenities that might need to be implemented to accommodate the user types for those. So starting with the Oak City trails, those are the trails that typically connect high impact urban centers, our activity centers, trails that are more likely for people to use not only for recreation but also for transportation. Trails like that may be more likely to need amenities like lighting, maybe more trash cans, things that maybe commuters might use. Neighborhood trails are shorter segments. They may not need to be as wide. They're not going to have the higher level of use as some of the Oak City trails will. Lighting may be appropriate in some, it may not be in others. Scenic trails and loops are the trails that we anticipate being primarily for recreational use. They're more natural environment. Lighting would not be appropriate in those types of situations, but because they aren't connected to developed areas, then maybe amenities like restrooms or water fountains might be more necessary to provide more frequently. Speaking about the trail prioritization process that I mentioned earlier, this is an overview of the prioritization criteria that we use. So you see the criteria on the left. On the far right are the points that are associated with each of those criteria. You'll see that the highest number of points were allocated to projects that improved access to the system in areas that were least served, and also in areas that addressed social equity. So in total, the plan includes 98 new trail projects. They are categorized into 5 different tiers from low priority to high priority. And using that prioritization process that I just described, each trail is assigned a number in terms of where it's seen in terms of priority. So you'll see that 1 through 98 there. In addition to new trail projects, the plan also identified 64 improvement projects to existing trails for 13 different trail segments. Those improvements included a number of different things, including lighting of our tunnels, widening, repaving, adding additional amenities, and more. Open space corridors are something that were sort of newly defined in this updated plan. Historically speaking, when you would ask a member of the public what a greenway was, they would say that it's the trail. But previous to this update, the greenway was not actually the trail. The greenway was the protected environmentally sensitive corridor that a trail might or might not be located in. This plan clarified that by changing the definition for the greenway to the open space corridor, and now when we say greenway, we can refer specifically to the trail. Previous plans included 270 miles of open space corridor, and this plan added 10 additional miles to that. Now, as I mentioned before, there are over 100 recommendations in the plan, so I'm just going to give sort of a snapshot at some of the recommendations that are broken down by these different categories. For planning and development, some of the recommendations were to clarify definitions in the UDO, and incentivize trail-oriented development, and provide developers with options to either build trails themselves or to pay into like a fee in lieu type program to be able to support trail development. As far as recommendations for trail security, there are recommendations to engage the community about departmental policies and operational procedures, so like times of day, things that they might do to ensure their own safety. Compile emergency response and crime data so that we can determine locations where those incidents might occur and then focus improvements on those areas. And then consider ways that we can actually design our trails to improve either real or perceived safety. For maintenance and operations, recommendations included enhancing communication about trail closures and detours, making sure that staff resources are maintained at a level that are consistent with the expansion of the system, and to strengthen our rapid response to clearing after storm events. Environmental stewardship, enhancing stream cleanup efforts, promoting a culture of shared stewardship between the department, trail users, and other agency partners, and to continue protecting sensitive environmental areas. Recommendations for collaboration and partnerships are to continue to work across departments, to form an interdepartmental working group that can discuss and address challenges that are the responsibility of multiple departments, and then also to take a more active role in community conversations about experiencing homelessness. So that's the background on the Greenway Master Plan. I thought this might be a good spot just to pause really quickly because I'm going to be moving into a description of the projects that we're currently working on to support the plan. But I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions on the plan itself at this point. Okay.
Just a couple. You mentioned developer opportunities to contribute back to the trail system. Could you just talk through a few of those? How does that work? What are the details of that?
So those are things that we're still working on and we're going to be discussing as we address updating the UDO and the comprehensive plan. So like historically, developers were required to provide an easement if their development included residential uses. But if it didn't, they weren't required to do anything. So that's something that we'll be able to look at doing, because I know adjacent communities do that as well. Have not had, I don't think an option for developers to contribute to like a fund for greenway improvements. And that's something that we'll be looking at doing too.
And in terms of timing, when would that be looked at? Does that need any kind of council recommendation, or is that something you all are kind of on?
That's something that we're working through right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then one other question. I think you mentioned shared stewardship. And so like I'm aware of groups, kind of naming parts of the trail, like, we're supporting this segment. Can you tell me about how does that work? What do those groups do if someone wants to get involved?
There are a number of ways to get involved. We do have a volunteer program. So they organize to go do trail cleanups. They do other activities like removing invasive species. They do a number of things that help our maintenance staff keep the trails in good shape.
And is that something they can sign up for easily in the City of Raleigh website?
Yeah, we have there's a place on our website where more information on the volunteer program is available, and we have staff that can be reached out to directly to become a part of that.
Great. I think I see Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, it's just one thing in this age of cell phones, you don't always need those emergency towers and things throughout on the trail. But I know you're going to talk about investment into safety. Mm-hmm. When you get to pavement markings, my question is, as far as pavement markings, are there ways for people to identify where they are? So in case they have an emergency, there's something they can look at and say, because if they're in the middle of a trail and someone's in a panic, they may not think as clearly, but is there something marker where they could give 911 or someone to help them give a location of where they are? Is that part of the pavement markings, or is that?
It's not part of the pavement markings, but it is part of our current signage program. So we do have mile markers that are actually located at every quarter mile.
Okay. And those mile markers, will it say mile marker, say 5 on trail Big River? I'm just using an example.
They're a post that's about waist high on me. Right. On the top, there's a surface that's slanted towards the user that says the mile marker number. Right. And on the side of the post, it says the name of the trail.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Well, moving forward with supporting the plan, the adoption of the updated master plan worked out really great with our most recent bond effort. The 22 Parks bond projects to be included in that were being discussed right as the master plan update was adopted. And because of that, some of the projects, the most high priority new trail projects and some of the higher priority reinvestment projects were included in the most recent bond in 2022. So the projects that are included are listed here on the left there, the Big Branch Connector and the Marsh Creek Trail Feasibility Study. Those are 2 brand new trail projects. Below that are the Walnut Creek Trail Improvement Project and the Lakeland West Loop, and those are both reinvestments in our current trail system. So supporting the plan in terms of safety, there are a lot of things that we had already started doing prior to the plan completion, but additional things that we have done since then and will continue to do that help us with safety improvements. The Penny for Parks program was one of those. The pavement markings, we applied centerline markings on all of our Oak City trails and loop trails, since we know that those are the highest utilized trails. Our marketing staff has led safety campaigns. We have tried to become more proactive on our closure and detour notifications. We're improving the services of some of our bridges and decks. And then, of course, you're aware of the 6-unit police, Raleigh Police Department unit that's assigned to the Greenway system. As far as amenities, over the last year, we've installed 10 bike repair stations across the system. The map there on the right, it shows where those are all located. We've added 35 additional benches, 11 trash cans, 4 mirrors. We are in the process of replacing all of those old wood trailhead ID signs that you might have seen. They're about my height, and they have that metal faded panel on the front. So you'll be noticing that about half of those will be replaced within the next 2 weeks. And the second half of those will be replaced at the beginning of the new year. Ongoing efforts to support the plan, we're going to be updating the pocket map. We've received lots of comments about its readability, that it needs additional contrast, that there's confusion over whether the trail is like the 10-foot standard asphalt trail or where it goes over a portion of sidewalk that may not be clear that users are still on the trail. So those are things that we're looking to correct in the new version. We're going to be kicking off a Greenway wayfinding plan, which will be the first time that we'll have a plan that will determine where specific signage should go, what that signage should look like, what information it should have on it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, updates to the comprehensive plan and the UDO. So as far as supporting the plan and our public-private partnerships, this map shows 11 different private trail connections that have been negotiated through the rezoning process. Some of those are complete, some of them will be complete as the developments are completed themselves. So that transitions us into the Neighborhood and Community Connections program. The program was developed in 2017. It was intended to improve connectivity, improve equity among users for the Greenway system. This is sort of a general guide of how that program works from when a project is first identified, how it's prioritized, where the locations are, and the community outreach. The Neighborhood and Community Connections program was updated in 2022 and sort of adopted some of the prioritization criteria that we used in the Greenway Master Plan. So what you'll see here on the left is how projects are originally identified through already adopted plans, through public requests, through gap analysis that we do as staff, and through public-private partnerships. And then on the right, you see the criteria that's applied to all of those projects to determine which ones should be to move forward. This is an overview of the points that are assigned based on criteria for the Neighborhood and Community Connections program, and you see that it is equity-based. Also considering population density, access to growth centers, existing greenway access, and where there might be existing easements. So with all of that in mind, we have this graphic that shows 26 potential Neighborhood and Community Connections projects. They're shown on this map in sort of the orangish star. Using the criteria for the prioritization, those projects were scored, and the 7 that are shown on this slide were the highest scoring. So those are the projects that are going to be moved forward for additional evaluation and feasibility. And this is just a zoomed in sort of example of one of those 7 projects, and provide some context for maybe why these projects might have been chosen. This particular project is a connection from Gorman Street along a stream corridor to the Walnut Creek Trail. There's an existing easement in place that runs from the Walnut Creek Trail to Kentwood Park. So the and the blue area that's shown on there is the area that's within a 10-minute walking distance of that star. So it gives you an idea of how many people would have access to the system based on this additional connection. This is another one of our connections at Barwell Road Park, and this one would connect the park to the Neuse River Trail. It's pretty significant in terms of its length, and just like the previous slide, the blue area shows what's within 10 minutes of walking to the star on the map there. So now that we have those 7 projects, we're going to be moving into a feasibility study for them to determine which ones are actually constructible, which ones are more complicated to construct, and that will allow us to narrow down the projects to focus on for design and construction. So this is an overview of the schedule of the program moving forward. Right now we are in the feasibility study stage, and that will be kicking off in the next months here. We anticipate coming back to City Council in the spring. Community engagement has already begun, and that'll last through the entire course of the program, and we anticipate construction in summer of 2025. So that is the presentation. I know that was a lot. I'll open up to questions now.
Any questions? Councilmember Patton?
Always. Hi, thanks for presentation.
Sure.
I'm trying to get to this slide. The Neighborhood and Community Connections program, how much was in the bond for that?
5.
Is it 5? It's okay, I knew the answer. It's 5, I think. Right?
5
Yeah.
million. Yeah.
And the thought being there's like roughly $1 million. There's like 5 projects, roughly $1 million per council district. There's more than 5 stars here, so you're going to narrow it down, and then that bucket will be fully programmed by the end of 25.
So I might take this on because we've had this conversation. So I think the goal is to see what is feasible and practical. I think one of the discussions between staff and we do have a couple of park board members is what flexibility to hold for strategic opportunities that might still emerge. So I think that this discussion and recommendation, I think, is still ahead. But Stephen's now come to
Yeah, Tansy's spot on. So we have 7 projects. Now we go into this preliminary engineering stage, and then we look and see how far that money gets. Then it's a discussion with the board and the council. Do you want us to move fully program all of them? Pot goes to 0. Or do you want us to do the first 2 or 3, expend 2 or 3 million, maybe design the other ones and see if any zoning cases come up or private opportunities, and then we develop some relationship. So we're going to chip away at it, get endorsement from you all on the highest priorities, and then seek those others, I'd say, after a short bit of time.
Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, and just to that, is it possible that some of the projects, I think you kind of mentioned it, around rezoning, but any park projects that could possibly be tied to some of the trail? Because I'm thinking one park project hopefully will be in the next park spawn some years from now, within the next 5, Barwell. You know, we have Greenway, we have a big master plan already designed and developed for Barwell. So is it possible we have some others that of these 7 that are identified that are close to a community center or a park that it can be, monies can be allocated from that into it as well?
So making sure clarity. So the ones that you saw were 2 good examples. We want to connect people to Barwell and to Kentwood. So we'll focus on connecting 2 parks. We don't intend on investing in the parks. Gotcha. So it would be, how do we get individuals to and from, especially within a 10-minute walk, to and from the parks?
And just because I can see the Gorman one, and I know that one area well, I'm curious, and this maybe you haven't figured out yet, but it seems like it goes into a section of Kentwood that's in the middle of the disc golf course, which we were talking about disc golf this morning. So, like, what are the thoughts on how that exits in a nobody gets hit in the head kind of thing?
Yeah, we have not gotten that far yet. And it would be very similar to Barwell. We bring in the backside of Barwell, so we're going to have to figure out, is it those 4 or 5 foot wide natural surface trails, and then we have to discuss accessibility. So those would be that's that next round of feasibility and engineering.
Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of people could definitely use that as long as they're not, at risk. Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, a couple more. Sorry, y'all. Staying with the Neighborhood Community Connections Program, I know we've already pulled from that pot to do a public-private partnership on a Greenway connection in Midtown. Did it go through this scoring matrix that we're seeing here? Is it the same scoring mechanism is applied?
For the connectivity piece, yes. So certain components it did, yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Not exactly related. But I get a lot of questions from my residents around where they might have shared ownership lots, like an HOA lot or something, and they kind of want to do their part to plug into the system where they're like, I can see the Greenway just right there. And so what advice would you have for people who might have property that they want to see plugged into the system?
email Raleigh Parks contact at raleighnc.gov. So email, call, go onto our website, find my phone number or a Greenway planner's phone number. It is interesting. We built our system, and now everybody wants to connect to it. So it's a wonderful thing. We would just hope these processes we put in place, we're working through plan review and zoning cases, that we can proactively do those instead of retroactively. But we are definitely open to it.
The only other comment I have is at some point I'd love to see the bicycle and pedestrian plan for the city. And I know we've talked about redoing that, and I believe there's funding for that. So, yeah, I don't know, Stephen, if it makes sense to have that conversation at committee at this time, or what that kind of presentation would look like.
I'm going to defer to your city manager representative.
Yeah, I think if you report this out, you could certainly, as a part of that report, ask that that the council refer a review of the city's bike pedestrian plan to the Growth and Natural Resources Committee. That's in the Transportation Department. So is, though complementary to this work, I think would be probably beyond the scope of the original referral. But certainly, as you reported this out, you could request that discussion be referred to this item or to another. I know.
Well, I was going to say, I know in the past we had an item that two committees were interested in, and we wound up doing a joint meeting. So I think just have a conversation with staff, and what it is, everyone received the same information. It was a joint meeting, and then you could go back and have whatever discussions that individual committee needed to have. But it helped with staff too, because they gave that one presentation to everyone at the same time and heard the same message. So that's probably a conversation the transportation chair could have with you.
All right, that sounds good. I'm on that committee too. Councilmember Patton.
Oh, I was just going to throw my hat in the ring for learning about the Blue Way plan as well, as long as we're learning about plans.
We can bring that forward.
Okay, that'd be cool.
Yeah, so I think certainly as you make your report out, and at any time you can ask for items to be referred to the committee, and certainly I think we'll be working on priorities for work sessions in the upcoming year as well. So I think that is another alternative to suggest work sessions for the entire council when there are issues of high interest for everybody.
Okay, great. I don't have anything else at this time. Councilmember Patton?
I know we have members from our Greenway Committee for Parks
yeah.
Board. I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yes.
Open
Would
the floor to
anyone
them.
like to make any public comment on this topic?
I'd like to say thank you. Beverly and Jeff are very involved, and I think the products we're putting forward are much better and thoughtful with their input, and they also bridge, bad pun, the BPAC. So they always bring BPAC members to the table, which I think are making a much better solution for some of our work. So.
I will just add one thing. This whole plan is done.
Come to the mic, Beverly.
And Beverly, tell us your name.
Beverly Clark, Chair of the Parks, Recreation, and Greenway Advisory Board. I think it's important to note that this Greenway Master Plan was began in, I think it was November of 2019, and the first community outreach began right after that. And so the plan was developed, both good and bad, in COVID times. And so it's something you just have to keep in mind because they were not able to, they had an extensive plan for lots of outreach that they couldn't do. They did a lot of great outreach, but they couldn't do all of the kinds that they had planned. So I think a lot, as a result, not as many members of the community are aware. So I'm glad you all have had this presentation today because I think it is important for people. It's a very, very lengthy plan, hundreds of pages and hundreds of pages of appendices. So there's a lot out there in it. So thank you.
Thank you, Beverly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beverly. Okay, well, with that, I am going to adjourn the meeting unless.
We need to, I
thank
move
you.
that we report this out as presented.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, that's unanimous. And with that, I believe I can adjourn the meeting. Have a good evening, everybody.